Cowboy guarded Apache through the night, and the shadow watching them knew him. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Ethan Hawke, a rugged cowboy, had spent most of his life in solitude. He lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of a rugged frontier town, the kind of place where the wind howled through the trees and the dust never settled. He was a man of few words and fewer friends, keeping to himself after a life full of loss. But tonight was different. On this particular night, Ethan had found himself in a situation unlike any other. He had stumbled upon a woman, a Native American woman, injured and on the run. Her name was Naya, and she was an Apache warrior, or at least that was what he assumed. Her clothes were torn, and she was clearly on the edge of collapse. Without a second thought, Ethan had helped her. He didn't know why. Perhaps it was the look of desperation in her eyes, or maybe it was the way she seemed so alone in the world. Whatever the reason, Ethan had taken her into his cabin, cleaned her wounds, and offered her what little comfort he could. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made the heart beat louder in your chest. But Ethan wasn't alone in that silence. Outside his cabin, hidden in the shadows, something, or someone, was watching. Ethan could feel it. The weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him, but whenever he tried to look, the shadows retreated. It wasn't until the night grew darker that he began to realize what was happening. Naya, though clearly exhausted, was sitting upright, her eyes scanning the horizon. "They are coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan turned to her, concern in his eyes. "Who's coming?" he asked, his hand instinctively going to the rifle beside him. Naya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared into the night, her face reflecting a deep understanding of the world around her. The air seemed to thicken with tension, as if the very earth itself was holding its breath. A chill ran down Ethan's spine, but he didn't move. He waited, trusting Naya's instincts, even though he had no reason to. Then, without warning, the distant sound of horses could be heard. Not just one, but many. Ethan's heart raced as he stepped to the window, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the darkened landscape. He could see nothing, but he could hear them now, closer, getting nearer. Ethan's hand tightened around the rifle as he prepared for whatever was coming, but Naya stopped him. "No," she said softly. "They are not here for us. Not yet." Ethan didn't understand. Who else could be out there? Who was watching them? The tension in the air was thick enough to slice with a knife, but just as suddenly as the tension had built, it disappeared into the night. The riders never appeared. There was no confrontation. No enemies charging the cabin. Just silence. Ethan slowly lowered his rifle, his eyes still searching the darkness. But the shadows had gone. The silence stretched on. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt truly uncertain of the world around him. Ethan woke up the next morning to the soft rustling of wind outside his cabin. The sun had barely risen, casting a warm golden hue over the rugged landscape. Inside, Naya was still sleeping, her breathing steady but shallow. The events of the night before had left Ethan with more questions than answers. Who were those riders, and why had they been watching? Naya had not given him a clear answer, but he could see it in her eyes, a recognition, a weight of knowledge she wasn't ready to share. Ethan stood silently by the window, scanning the horizon. There were no signs of movement, no dust clouds in the distance. The land was calm, almost too calm. His mind raced with possibilities, but the morning silence only deepened the mystery. He turned away from the window and stepped softly toward Naya. She was still wrapped in the blanket, her face relaxed, but the tension from the night lingered in the air like a thick fog. He gently nudged her shoulder, and her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she simply stared at him, as though trying to place him in the world of reality. Finally, Her voice broke the silence. They will come today, she said quietly. Ethan didn't need to ask who they were. He could tell from the tone of her voice that the danger wasn't over. How do you know? He asked, his voice calm, but his mind racing with the implications. I've lived with it all my life, she replied, her eyes distant. The Apache tribes are not the only ones hunting me. There are others, people who will stop at nothing to get what they want. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had never known that the world could be so cruel, so full of hidden enemies. I don't understand, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Why are they hunting you? Naya hesitated for a moment before speaking again. Because I carry a secret, she said, her voice heavy with a mixture of regret and sorrow. A secret that could change everything. Ethan looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. She had been running for a long time, and it was clear that she was no stranger to danger. What secret? He asked, his curiosity piqued. But Naya didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood up, her movements slow and deliberate, as though gathering her strength. She glanced out the window, then back at him, and in that moment, Ethan knew she was making a decision. I will tell you everything, she said, her voice filled with resolve. But first you need to trust me. And you need to be ready for what comes next. Ethan nodded, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what was about to happen, but he knew one thing for certain: he had to help her. Whatever the secret was, whatever danger lay ahead, he couldn't let her face it alone. Together, they would face whatever came, even if it meant standing against the world. As Ethan prepared himself for the unknown, he couldn't shake the feeling that their fates were intertwined. The wind outside picked up again, and the air seemed to carry a sense of impending change, as if something was about to unfold, something beyond their control. But Ethan was ready. He had no choice. Naya had already come into his life, and now he would stand by her side, no matter the cost. With one last glance at the horizon, he turned back to Naya, his resolve stronger than ever. Whatever the secret was, it was about to change everything. Ethan and Naya sat in silence, the weight of the morning settling heavily between them. The air outside was still, the kind of stillness that made everything feel fragile, as though the world was holding its breath. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on Naya, waiting for her to speak, to tell him the secret she had promised. Her gaze was distant, as though she was trying to find the right words, or perhaps deciding if she could trust him enough to share the truth. Finally, she took a deep breath, the sound almost inaudible in the quiet of the cabin. The secret I carry, she began slowly, is not one of power or treasure, but one of survival. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his curiosity growing. Survival? He echoed, his voice filled with questions. What do you mean? Naya closed her eyes for a moment, as though gathering the strength to relive a painful memory. My people, she said, her voice soft but steady, were once a thriving tribe. But we were betrayed, driven into the mountains, hunted by those who sought to destroy us. Ethan's heart tightened at the sadness in her voice, but he stayed silent, letting her continue. Before the attack, Naya continued, my father, the chief, entrusted me with something powerful. It was a symbol, a key to our survival, but also a curse. For years I carried it with me, not knowing the full extent of its power. But others knew. And they wanted it. They would stop at nothing to get it. Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of her story. And you think these people are still hunting you? He asked quietly. Naya nodded, her eyes meeting his for the first time in what felt like forever. Yes, she said simply. They are after me, but not just for the symbol. They want to erase everything my people stood for, and with me gone, they think they can. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken fear. Ethan felt the weight of her words, and for the first time, he understood the depth of the danger they were both in. But something inside him stirred, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He had never been one to back down from a fight, but this was different. This wasn't about defending his land or his pride. This was about protecting someone who had nowhere else to turn. "You're not alone in this," Ethan said, his voice firm, more sure than he had ever been. "I'll help you, Naya. Whatever it takes, I'll stand by you." Naya looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. The moment felt heavy, like the calm before the storm. Ethan knew there was more to the story, more he needed to understand, but for now, they had to focus on the immediate danger. "We need to prepare," Ethan said, standing up and moving toward the window. "They'll come for us. But we're ready." He turned back to Naya, who had risen to her feet as well, her face now set with determination. "We'll face them together," she said, her voice steady and strong. Ethan nodded, his heart beating a little faster. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: he would do whatever it took to protect Naya, and to uncover the truth of the secret she carried. Ethan and Naya spent the morning preparing for what was to come. The wind had picked up again, carrying with it the scent of dust and dried grass, but beneath it, there was a strange heaviness in the air. The calm before the storm, Ethan thought. They had no idea how many were coming, but they had to be ready. Ethan moved through his cabin with purpose, securing weapons and supplies. Naya, despite the lingering exhaustion, worked beside him with a quiet intensity. Her strength was evident in every movement, and Ethan couldn't help but admire it. She was a survivor, just like him. "We need to move quickly," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. Naya nodded, her gaze steady. She knew the land well, and though she had spent much of her life running, she had learned how to survive in the wilderness. Together, they made a plan. Naya would guide him to the high ground where they could keep an eye on the surrounding area. Ethan would make sure they had enough food and water to last them through the night. As they worked, Ethan felt a growing sense of determination. He wasn't sure what would happen when the attackers came, but he knew he couldn't let Naya face it alone. By mid-afternoon, the preparations were complete. They had gathered what they needed, and now it was time to wait. The cabin was quiet, the only sound the occasional creak of the wood as the wind blew against it. Ethan sat by the window, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had a feeling they weren't far off. "Do you think they will come today?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. Naya's voice was calm when she answered. "Yes, they'll come. They always do." Ethan turned to face her. "And you're sure you're ready?" Naya met his gaze, and for the first time, Ethan saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before, a flicker of doubt. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "I've been ready for this my entire life," she said quietly. Ethan nodded, understanding that she had faced much worse than this before. And yet, despite everything, she was still standing. He couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration for her. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the air grew tense. The sound of distant hooves reached their ears, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat. They were here. "Get ready," Naya whispered. They both moved quickly, taking their positions. Ethan stood at the window, his rifle at the ready, while Naya crouched beside him, her eyes focused on the approaching riders. The group of riders was still too far to see clearly, but Ethan knew they weren't alone. The shadows were coming for them. He could feel it. The first of the riders came into view, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. Ethan's grip tightened around his rifle. They were coming for Naya, for the secret she carried. The secret that had brought them both to this point. And Ethan was ready to stand beside her, no matter what. As the riders drew closer, Naya's expression hardened. She knew what was coming, but there was no fear in her eyes. Only resolve. "Stay calm," she whispered to Ethan. "We're in this together." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment had arrived, and there was no turning back. Ethan's heart was racing as the riders drew closer, the sound of hooves growing louder with each passing second. The fading light of the sun cast long shadows across the land, and the tension in the air was palpable. Naya stood beside him, her body tense, but her eyes unwavering. She had faced this before. Ethan wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew he couldn't let Naya face this alone. His hand tightened around his rifle, his muscles coiled, ready for whatever came next. As the riders got closer, Ethan could make out their figures more clearly. There were 5 of them, riding at a steady pace, their horses kicking up dust as they moved toward the cabin. Ethan's breath caught when he saw the one leading them, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his cheek. This man, Ethan knew, was no stranger to conflict. The man's eyes scanned the horizon, as though looking for something, or someone. His gaze lingered for a moment on the cabin, then he motioned for the others to stop. Ethan held his position, his eyes locked on the group, but he could feel Naya's presence beside him, steady and calm. "They've found us," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the wind. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. The riders were here, and there was no turning back now. The leader dismounted first, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. The others followed suit, their movements fluid, practiced. It was clear they weren't just passing through. They were here for a reason. "You're the one they call Ethan Hawke," the leader called out, his voice deep and commanding. Ethan didn't move, didn't acknowledge him right away. The leader's eyes narrowed as he took a step closer. "You've been helping the Apache, haven't you?" Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened. He could feel Naya standing beside him, but he knew she wouldn't speak. "Not yet." "I don't know what you're talking about," Ethan said, his voice steady, though the tension in his chest was growing. The leader smirked, his eyes flicking toward Naya. "Don't play dumb," he said. "We know she's here. And we know what she's carrying." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. It was clear now, this wasn't just a random encounter. These men knew exactly who Naya was. They knew about the secret she carried, and they had come to take it. The leader took another step closer. "You're standing in our way, Hawke," he said. "And that's a mistake." Ethan's eyes locked with Naya's, and for the briefest moment, he saw something shift in her expression. It was the same determination he had seen in her before, but now, it was tinged with something else, fear, yes, but also a deep, unwavering resolve. She wasn't going to let these men take her without a fight. Ethan knew then that he would stand by her, no matter what. "You'll have to go through me first," Ethan said, his voice low, but full of conviction. The leader smiled, a cold, predatory smile. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." The riders, now dismounted, began to move closer, their eyes fixed on Ethan and Naya. The air seemed to grow heavier with each passing second, and Ethan could feel the weight of their gaze on him. But he wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. "Let's see how long that resolve lasts," the leader said, his voice thick with menace. Ethan stood tall, rifle ready, his eyes scanning the riders. The moment had come. And Ethan was ready to face it head-on. Ethan's heart was pounding as the riders took their positions. The leader's eyes locked on him with an intensity that made the air feel thick. Ethan could sense the tension building, like a storm on the horizon, waiting to break. The moment they'd both been preparing for had arrived, and there was no turning back now. He held his ground, his rifle steady in his hands, ready for whatever was to come. Naya, standing beside him, was eerily calm. Her eyes were focused, scanning the riders as though she had been through this many times before. There was no hesitation in her movements, no fear in her stance. She was a warrior, and Ethan was beginning to realize just how much strength she carried inside her. The leader, still smiling that cold, predatory smile, took another step forward, his boots crunching the dirt beneath him. "You really think you can stop us, Cowboy?" he sneered, his voice thick with disdain. Ethan's grip on the rifle tightened, his body coiled and ready. "You'll find out soon enough," he said, his voice low, calm, but with a bite to it that made the leader pause for a brief second. The wind picked up again, swirling dust and sand around them, and for a moment, all Ethan could hear was the sound of his own breath. Then, the leader signaled to the others, and the riders began to move in closer, circling them like predators closing in on their prey. Ethan's heart raced, but his mind stayed focused. He couldn't let them get too close. Not while Naya was beside him. He would protect her, no matter the cost. The leader raised his hand, signaling for the riders to halt. He stepped closer, his voice now a low, menacing whisper. You can't protect her forever, Cowboy. The secret she carries is more dangerous than you can possibly understand. You'll both regret this. Ethan's eyes flicked to Naya, who stood tall and unmoving, her expression unreadable. He could sense her strength, but he also knew the weight of her burden. Whatever the secret was, it had cost her everything. And now, it seemed it was costing them both. She's not going anywhere, Ethan said, his voice unwavering. The leader's smile faded, replaced with a look of cold fury. You'll regret crossing us, he warned, his tone final. Ethan didn't flinch. He stood his ground, rifle ready, eyes locked on the leader. He had made his decision. And he would not back down. The air was thick with anticipation as the riders watched, waiting for a signal, for something to happen. Ethan knew this moment could change everything. He knew there would be no easy way out. But he also knew that, no matter the odds, he had to fight. And fight he would. We're not afraid of you, Naya said suddenly, her voice strong and clear. Her words seemed to pierce the tension like a knife. The leader's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Ethan saw a flicker of doubt in his gaze. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. With a sharp motion, the leader gave the signal to advance, and the riders moved forward, closing the distance between them. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't flinch. He was ready. The moment had arrived, and nothing would stop him from protecting Naya. Not now. Not ever. Ethan's hand tightened around his rifle as the riders approached. The leader, who had been at the forefront of the group, was now only a few paces away. His eyes locked with Ethan's, and the tension in the air thickened. There was no more talking, no more threats. This was it, the moment where everything would change. The riders were closing in, but Ethan remained unmoving, his gaze focused on the leader, unwavering. He knew Naya stood beside him, just as ready. She had been through worse, and now, they stood together. The leader stopped just short of Ethan, his eyes studying him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. You're making a big mistake, the leader muttered, almost as though to himself. You have no idea what you're up against. Ethan's jaw clenched. He wasn't sure who these men were or what they wanted with Naya, but he knew one thing. He wasn't about to let them take her. It's not a mistake, Ethan said, his voice calm, but firm. This is where you leave. We're not backing down. The leader let out a low chuckle. You think you can stop us? He asked, his tone condescending. Ethan didn't respond. The answer was already clear. He wasn't going to let them win, not this time. For a brief moment, the leader's eyes flicked to Naya, as though he were trying to gauge her reaction. She stood tall, silent, her expression unreadable, but Ethan could see the strength in her. She wasn't afraid. The leader seemed to take this as a sign of something. He nodded to the others, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough. The riders dismounted and began to form a circle around Ethan and Naya. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind of tension that you could feel in your bones. You really think you can stand against us? The leader repeated, his eyes narrowing. You're just a cowboy. She's just an Apache. You have no power here. Ethan stood his ground, not flinching. We have each other, he said simply. The leader's gaze flicked between Ethan and Naya, a flash of something unreadable crossing his face. Then, without warning, he raised his hand, signaling the riders to step back. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Ethan's heart was still pounding, but he didn't lower his rifle. He wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but he was ready. You're lucky, the leader said, his voice suddenly quieter, more dangerous. I'm giving you one last chance. Leave now, and I'll let you both walk away. Ethan didn't hesitate. No deal, he said, his voice steady. The leader's smile disappeared, replaced by a cold expression. So be it, he said, turning his back on them. But don't say I didn't warn you. The riders began to move away, their eyes still on Ethan and Naya, and for a moment, it seemed like the tension had broken. But Ethan knew better. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. As the riders disappeared into the distance, Ethan turned to Naya. Are you all right? He asked, his voice soft. She nodded, her face still calm, but her eyes reflected something deeper. We're not safe yet, she said, her voice steady. They'll be back. Ethan didn't say anything at first. He just nodded. He knew she was right. But they had won this small victory. And for now, that was enough. They had each other, and that was all they needed. Ethan and Naya spent the next few hours in tense silence, the weight of the encounter still hanging heavily in the air. The sun had fully set, casting the land into shadow, and the wind, which had been calm earlier, now howled across the plains. Ethan kept a watchful eye on the horizon, his senses heightened, while Naya moved quietly around the cabin, gathering what little they had and preparing for the possibility of another confrontation. Ethan could feel the shift in the air, the calm after the storm that was anything but reassuring. Naya had been right. The leader's words had been more than just threats. They were a promise of something to come. He knew it wasn't over. But for now, the riders had left. Ethan glanced over at Naya, who was now seated by the fire, her face illuminated by the flickering light. She looked as calm as ever, but there was a hardness in her eyes, a determination that had been there since the first moment they met. She wasn't just surviving, she was fighting. What now? Ethan asked quietly, his voice almost drowned out by the wind. Naya didn't look at him right away. Instead, she stared into the fire, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she finally spoke. Now we wait. Ethan frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. Wait? For what? Naya turned to him then, her gaze steady, unwavering. They will return, she said simply. And when they do, we will be ready. Ethan stood still, absorbing her words. There was no panic in her voice. No fear, just a quiet certainty that sent a chill through him. Naya had been through this before. She had lived with this constant threat hanging over her, and now, she was asking him to stand by her side. He wasn't sure what he had expected when he decided to help her, but it certainly wasn't this waiting, this uncertainty. But as he looked at her, he understood. She wasn't just asking for his help, she was giving him a chance to make a difference. And he wasn't about to back down. I'm with you, Ethan said firmly, his voice low but filled with resolve. Naya nodded, her lips curling into a small, almost imperceptible smile. I know. The rest of the night passed quietly, but neither of them slept. Ethan stayed by the window, rifle in hand, scanning the surrounding land for any signs of movement. Naya, though exhausted, remained alert, her eyes darting between the shadows and the fire, always watching, always waiting. The hours dragged on, but there was no sign of the riders. By the time the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, Ethan felt a strange sense of unease settle over him. It wasn't the quiet of a peaceful morning, it was the silence before the storm. Naya stood and moved toward the door, her movements fluid, like a shadow in the early light. She didn't say anything, but Ethan knew she was ready. She had been ready long before he had come into her life. Together, they would face whatever was to come. But deep down, Ethan knew that the path they were walking was one they could not turn back from. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. And that thought gave him the strength to face whatever came next. Ethan and Naya stood side by side, watching the first light of day break across the horizon. The quiet morning stretched out before them, but neither of them could shake the sense of anticipation hanging in the air. They knew the riders would return. It wasn't a question of if, but when. The stillness of the land was deceptive, masking the danger that lurked just beyond the reach of sight. The wind carried a faint rustling sound, the leaves trembling on the trees as if they too sensed the coming storm. Ethan checked his rifle one more time, ensuring it was properly loaded and ready for whatever would come. Beside him, Naya stood with the same quiet determination she had worn since the moment he had met her. There was no fear in her eyes, only the same resolve that had kept her alive all these years. She had known this day would come. The riders would come. And they would face them together. Ethan turned to look at her, his gaze steady. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked quietly. Naya's eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of vulnerability beneath her strong exterior. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I've been ready my whole life," she said simply. Her voice was calm, but the weight of her words settled heavily in Ethan's chest. She wasn't just talking about the riders. She was talking about everything that had brought them here, everything she had lost, everything she had fought to protect. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. He understood. The hours passed, each minute stretching into the next as they waited. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. Ethan's hand never strayed far from his rifle, his eyes scanning the distance, always alert. But the riders did not come. At least not yet. The quiet stretched on, heavy and thick with tension. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Naya, however, seemed at peace, though the stillness of her posture made it clear that she was as ready as she would ever be. As the sun began to dip lower, casting the land in shades of gold and orange, Ethan felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. A movement in the distance caught his eye. A cloud of dust rose in the air, slowly forming a line of figures riding toward them. Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. They were here. The riders had returned. Naya shifted beside him, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight. "It's time," she said quietly. Ethan didn't hesitate. He was ready. They both were. As the riders grew closer, Ethan could make out their faces, cold and unreadable. The leader was at the front, his eyes locked on Naya. Without a word, the riders dismounted, their movements swift and practiced. Ethan's heart raced, but he held his ground, his rifle steady in his hands. The leader stepped forward, his gaze shifting from Ethan to Naya. "You think you can run from this forever?" he asked, his voice laced with contempt. Naya stood tall, her eyes unwavering. "I don't run," she replied simply. Ethan's eyes flicked to the leader, his mind already calculating their next move. There was no turning back now. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The silence hung between them for a long moment, and then, as if on cue, the leader's lips curled into a cold smile. "Then prepare for what's coming." Ethan braced himself, his hand tightening on his rifle as he prepared for the next move. This was it. The battle for Naya's future, for their survival, had begun.